like they've got here, the lack of ground clearance and poor subfloor ventilation is because they are built close to the ground, which then poses a problem for re-insulating.
Yeah.
So in those, if you can't get under the floor, I guess the best thing to do is make sure that all the vents that are in the floor that have been built into the ring foundation are clear and uncovered, and potentially you could cut some more in if needed. So rising damp, I think you could go rising damp and lack of insulation. That's going to come down to accessibility to the underfloor as well as the height. So if you've got minimal height, you're probably not going to be able to attend to some of this. As far as retrofitting insulation, because you're not going to have accessibility for it unless you cut out. And you can do it. You just get, say for example, this floor here is you can get underneath it, and it's been retrofitted. But because some of these floors are only built like this far from the ground, and half the piles are not piles, they're rocks. They just bang a rock there and then put that on. So what you can do is, if you're going to do a full retrofit of the house, is you can actually cut the whole room out, look at the floor joists as a whole, or look at the floor structure as a whole, then retrofit from above, and then put flooring on, carpet, So it can be done. It just means that you've got to do it from the top as opposed to the bottom. That way you can obviously lay the plastic as well underneath the floor.
And that would be expensive.
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on what you're replacing the floor with, but it is one of those costs. You have to do a cost analysis on what the house is worth, how much you like the house, how much you want to, keep the flavour of the era that you're in, and obviously your budget. So the budget whole, you've got to look at the project as a whole. If you're going to doing it in sections, then you can start with the floor and do that, and then obviously save up some more money, and then deal with the walls, deal with the windows, deal with the ceiling. So there's definitely ways of doing it.
When you said lay plastic, what do you mean by plastic?
So, say for example, if this house here, say we've got a 100 square metre, it's probably even bigger than that, isn't it? Call it 100 square metre 80 villa, 100 square metre villa. That is the ground from the ground, dirt to the top of the floor is only maybe 300 mil. That includes all the joists and subfloor. So you're not going to get underneath. So basically what you'll have to do is, say you've got a big room and you want to do it room by room. You'll start in a bedroom. You'll cut all the flooring up. It's likely to be T&G. So you have to pull up the T&G, T&G flooring, you know what that is?
Yeah.
Tongue and groove.
Yeah.
So you'll pull up all the T&G flooring, which most likely will have Bora in it anyway. Or it could be Kauri, could be Totra, depending on where it was milled and where it was built. So there could be dry rot from moisture. This also could be insect infestations, which you're dealing with. So you'd pop up all the floor, the T&G flooring, denail all the joists out of there, and then you could then cross-check, well not cross-check, but have a look at all the joists, make sure they're all straight and they're fully supported. Then you could lay plastic on the ground and tape it as the best you can to the subfloor, the piles or rocks or ring foundation, whatever's there. That stops the moisture from rising up to the subfloor.
Plastic is actually waterproofing.
It's waterproofing, but it's also stopping the moisture from rising from the ground. Like if you're in an area that is renowned for having wet, the high water table, say for example, here's a high water table, but the thing about this place is it's actually built on an old riverbed where it's sand, so there's not actually a lot of moisture under the floor. So each house is where it's located has a big part to play in how damp it is under the floor, under the subfloor. So we've got missing or inadequate piles and joists, and that could be due to, obviously there was no building code back in those days, but there was an idea. A lot of the foundations back in those days they weren't built on piles. They might be just rocks or old bricks I've seen it I've done jobs myself where you pulled apart the foundation. They are basically rocks and bricks all put together, then plastered over. So, and then everything's sitting on top of there. Obviously, the earthquake found out a lot about that in Christchurch. But so what you do is if you can assess it from crawling underneath the floor space, is ideal. But you can also attack it from above. So you just see where the floor's springy, see where it needs attention, and either put some additional piles underneath the bearers, which is some of the subfloor framing that you'll often find or will find in these houses. So a lot of this will be, you can attack at the same time if you were doing it room by room, as far as renovations, deep fit renovations, sagging joists or bouncy floors, uneven floors. There's not a lot you can do about low ground clearance. It is what it is, unless you're jacking it up and spending a lot of money, but chances are the ground clearance is what it is, so that'll dictate how you attack rising damp with plastic as well as insulation. So it'll be either doing it retrofit from underneath or attacking it from the top by cutting the current floor out.
Do you lift houses a lot when you're doing renos, or are you aware of it?
No, as in it's depends on, because a lot of the stuff now with new builds is to do with the floodplain. You'll have old houses are sitting on the ground, and then because of the new floodplain requirements, the new house next door that's been demolished from the earthquake, you have to go to the minimum floodplain requirement, which is a metre higher, which then you get these houses that are sitting here and then sitting down here, so it looks really, really odd. So there's those sort of things. But as far as renovations, depending on what you're doing with it, there's been some renovations where they'll lift the house up and move it to the back of the site where they can then develop the front or whatever. So then that gives you an opportunity to lift it up. But I haven't really seen jobs where you might retrofit some piles and redo the subfloor, but I've never seen a job where they lift it up just purely for the sake of getting some more ventilation under it. It has been done, I'm sure, but I've never seen it. It comes down to money.
And there is foundation perimeter walls with cracked masonry, and what do you need to do for that?
With a lot of the older houses that you will find, again, a lot of them won't actually be solid concrete. They'll be bricks and rock and then solid plastered over the top of it. So they're very hard to remedy, apart from the best you either sort of try and mesh plaster over the top of it, but chances are it is what it is, really. So the only way you're going to attend to that is if you're replacing the whole foundation, or if it is an area that the house is sagging, then you have to relook at doing maybe lifting it up and then relooking the ring foundation. You can cut sections out, but you're not really achieving much by doing that, because chances are won't be down to clay either. They usually just sort of scrape a little bit out and put the foundation on top of that, so it won't be down to solid bearing. You're sort of limited. Two different, I guess, the different types of insulation you could put in underfloor. You could put in EPS, which is extruded polystyrene, which is a solid one. PIR, which is another polyurethane solid product. You've got glass wool, or bats, and then you've got your different polyester wool blends and stuff like that. So there's lots of different options that you can use for underfloor insulation. Just depends on your accessibility, of course, and how you're going to get in there.
And cost.
Underfloor, there was a time where, even with plasterboard, this place had it. When I was retrofitting this place, is you have foil back products. So the plasterboard that we had, that was in here in the 70s, had foils, basically aluminium foil glued to the back of it, which they thought was good for stopping heat transfer and movement. Same thing with when you used to do a timber subfloor, even up into when I was doing my apprenticeship, they were still doing it, where you'd do a new timber subfloor and you'd have the joists, which the flooring sits on, and between the joists you'd have silver paper, which you would drape, and it had to be a minimum of 100mm sag, usually around 100mm, so you just get a block of timber with a piece sitting over the joist, and that would give you the sag. It would have drain holes in it, so any moisture that happened to get in between the underfloor and the side isolation, it would have holes to drain out of. And that was right up until pretty recently. I mean,
Oh,
it's
so
probably still a thing now. And that's what people used to do for. It was supposed to try and create those air gaps. Same thing as insulation, is you're trying to create an area of still air for the heat to be, stagnant. So it's probably not the right word, but that was what it was. Is the isolation was cut in between the joists and the dwangs, so it was all solid, but it still obviously had air movement because it had the drainage holes. So it wasn't really. Don't think it was doing much at all. You do, but just not in the main part of the wall.
Yeah.
So your dwangs are needed for hanging things up and for attaching some things, but they're not needed for the structure.
And so that's the point, yeah, hanging things up. Like,
Yeah, so if you've got a heavy mirror, or you've got all your trophies that you want to hang on the wall.
Foil, and I thought, what on earth is foil?
So the plasterboard had it. Foil was called sisolation, and that used to be draped on the subfloor. Right, I don't know if it's still done now. I'll be very surprised if it is, because now you've got more solid insulation that is designed for subfloor.
But a previous reno that somebody has done.
Someone will definitely find it. So you're just better off cutting that out and replacing with proper insulation.
Perfect. All the brand stuff has asbestos through pretty much every jolly era.
Right.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, well, that's probably the thing. I think that's the first thing that you need to assess when you're doing renovations, is making sure you do an asbestos test. Things like some plasters, some linings. Asbestos is used to insulate around fuse boxes, switchboards, even remember the old zip things you used to have in the schools, the zip kettles on the wall? They have asbestos in them as well. So everything like that, if you think you just put it in vinyl, the old vinyl had asbestos on it, floor coverings. So I think the best thing you need to do before you do a deep renovation is get an asbestos test on those areas.
do you recommend any particular companies, or do we no?
It's just as long as they're licensed. Definitely look for license. Don't look for the cheapest one you can get. You need to make sure they've got the licenses to be able to obviously test as well as dispose of it, because it all needs to be wrapped up and disposed of properly. And obviously when it's removed, people have to be making sure that it's not being crunched up, so to speak, damaged. It needs to be taken out as whole as possible. And that's what needs to be done by licensed people, where they're having the proper protective equipment. When you're stripping a house, you're going to find the old black wiring so that's usually after a certain age you need to replace it. So that's where you get obviously a registered electrician to come and run some new wires and new plugs and stuff like that. Because if you're doing up a house and the wiring hasn't been changed, then you're obviously at fire risk, creating fire risks. Because within each city, it's
regional.
colonised at different, pretty much the same time, but then you look at Littleton, for example, that was probably one of the first areas that was colonised, so a lot of the houses there are very similar in design. Then you come into, say, Christchurch, and you've got probably the Fendleton, Merivale, the colonial homesteads, stuff like that, and then you're pushing to the outer suburbs, and then it becomes, then the different eras come in, so then you're moving out, you go to Riccarton, and that's going to be more sort of a combination of 60s to 70s to 80s, so it just changes.
On the Barrington side, I noticed driving through there a lot of bungalows with those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you look
kind
at
of 20s era.
So you look at like Summerfield Street. A lot of those ones are just those old villas that are there, and then you go up to Cashmere, and then they're sort of getting quite bigger. Sort of, I don't know, the colonial weather, the bigger skirtings and the more money is being able to spend because they're building on a hill. Yeah. So it just depends on time the place was settled. This is what I think anyway, to where it was settled, and then as they spread out from the hubs or the centre and moving out, and then the decades go and the villas and the designs change. So I mean, like Dunedin, for example, or the student flats, they were the first ones to be built, right? So that's why they have issues, because they're just the oldest ones that are there. So when you're doing, I think, the framing, internal walls and ceilings, basically when you strip it off, again, once you've done your asbestos testing and you know you're working in a good clean environment, then you can pretty much strip it right back to however far your budget wants to go. You'll find that some timber framing will need replacing because of insect infestation or areas where moisture has got it and there has been rot. So you'll replace that. The key is obviously to make sure that when you insulate it, you're protecting that insulation. So if you're not taking the cladding off, then you can put a weather tight or a layer from the inside, similar to the one we did in Riccarton. Riccarton? Yeah. So basically you're wrapping the outside of the framing with, say, a weather tight barrier, and then putting the insulation there, so then the moisture doesn't affect the insulation.
Framing's good. We'll strip it back, replace as needed, protect your insulation with weather tight layer from the inside. Yeah.
And also thinking about potentially running, if you've got the room, which most people do, you're only losing it, is putting a service cavity, even if you're not doing air tightness, because some older places you have to do a really, really, really deep retrofit to get an airtight home. And some people may want to do that, but if you haven't got the budget, then you can just make the thicker insulation, better insulation, your priority. And by adding a service cavity on the inside, which we've done in here, it allows you to have that thicker insulation and minimise thermal bridging as well. Because some houses you will spend way more than what you'll save in the long term by trying to airtight it, because a house like this, there's so many areas where you just miss. You can't get to it unless you're pulling the whole place apart, which I'm not going to do. It's not economical to do that. So where we can, we've obviously doubled the insulation in the ceiling. We've doubled the insulation in the walls. We'll be changing the windows in time, and everything's geared up for that. I've already pre-done a lot of stuff now to allow for changing the windows from aluminium to PVC. So by adding in service cavities to walls where you're changing some bifold doors to sliders, you need the thicker walls. So by doing that at the start, and when you come to change the walls, then it's just already done. You don't have to redo the linings.
I love that you're prepping.
Yeah.
So you can't afford.
No. So you don't need to do everything all at once. You just, with good planning, you can plan how your renovations are done in stages. So you can build up your wall layers and line it and have architraves. So I've already put the trims around my reveals in architraves, so I can just cut the old windows out and slide the other windows in. Should be as easy as that, as is the way I've planned it. So, and then all I've got to do is just plaster a little bit around the outsides.
I'll take that out.
No, but see if you look behind you, see how I've got the double reveals around by the curtain. So that's basically the service cavity.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll just cut the reveal as I need it, and then just push the other window up to it.
I'm guessing a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is fairly universal to the different eras.
Oh yeah, because at the end of the day, and I think I said this right at the start, is all the eras, regardless of, it's basically aesthetics and what they look like. So if you think of it like a car, right? You've got four wheels, a motor, and a chassis. What it looks like, you've got a Toyota Starlet, Ford Escort, Ferrari, Maserati. They've all got four wheels, they've all got a motor, they've all got a chassis, but they look different, and what the products that are in it are all slightly different. So same thing with houses. They've all got a foundation, they've all got a subfloor or a slab, they've all got timber framing, they've all got trusses or a pitched roof, got windows. It's just how they're put together at the time.
Well, a villa will have so many more inherent problems.
No, it's just, well, yes, it probably will, because it's older. It won't be as airtight. The products that are used are dated, they're not treated, things like that. Whereas if you've got a house, although the houses now are built to current code, they've got the right treatments and the timbers. They should last. The long time. But due to the performance of the way that they've been built with the insulation and the mold that's going to grow and stuff, that's what may fail them.
ones.
Yeah, so
I mean,
so going back to the different eras, you'll have most of the time the earlier ones are having timber cladding, so your weatherboards, mainly weatherboards really when you think about it, peel back weatherboards. So again, those there are systems being developed where you can insulate over the top of them, but then it's got to be looked at on a case by case basis. And if you are ripping off the claddings, well then you're going to expose the timber and then you can insulate. And so if you're not redoing the inside, you can do it from the outside. So it comes down to what your budget is, what your end goal is with it. If you're doing a deep retrofit where you're stripping off the linings from inside plus the claddings, well then you can attack it from both sides, which is really good. But say for example, if you couldn't afford or didn't want to strip out the internal linings, but you can do the outside, then you do it from the outside. So you can then insulate things from the outside. You can if you're replacing the claddings. So weatherboards, again, you've got issues like, because of the older ones being timber like Remu or mostly Remu, they weren't treated, so they have the border, local insect infestation. So what becomes a problem then? So also lead paint. A lot of the houses were painted with lead paint, and that's where you get the toxins being leached into the ground.
Really?
Well, you remember think about the painting of kids' cribs, and what do the kids do when they start
Toys.
teething?
wooden toys.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. The old bumblebee, that you tow a hot pine. Kids, they're just chewing the
Fuzzy bee.
shiznit right out of those. Anyway,
Anyway,
but that's another line of.
the lead paint toxins being leached into the ground.
Oh, so that's just if like if you're scraping the paint back or stripping it and stuff, you've got to be careful around doing that. So making sure you're wearing protective equipment, but also just where that's going. So if you're just scraping it off into ground as opposed to having like a tarpaulin to catch it, is again it's what's happening for the next generation. If you're trying to attack, you can still get borer bombs, I think, but if chances are the borer's probably gone in these older houses anyway. So what you're doing is just identifying the areas where the timber is going to fail. So with the holes, because you'll see these little pinpoints on the outside of the weatherboards, and what happens, that could be on the south side. So when it rains, water can then get in these little holes, because it's a dry timber, so it's going to want to suck in the moisture. So then obviously you have that moisture problem and damage that way. So then that, if you've insulated from the inside and left the cladding as is, then moisture can get in to your insulation. Potentially, if you haven't done the layers right. Yeah, so there's a lot of the houses these days, obviously with the treatment, is to nullify the borer attack. Whereas a lot of the houses, I think you still can get it, but it's not as prevalent. A lot of the houses, they've come and they've gone. Especially these older houses, the borer's been and gone, but you've still got the damage from it. So a lot of the time, I've seen timbers, Remu framing, where you can. It's like termites in America or Australia, is they'll just come in and you can see the timber, but then you crush it with your hand. You can actually literally crush it with your hand, and that is obviously a problem for structure. I think just lead paint, you just got to be know it. You just wary of it. The fact that it's an older house, then chances are it's had like 15 layers of paint by the 15 different owners. So just making sure you're aware of that and treating it accordingly. Making sure anything that you're scraping off, you're capturing and disposing of properly. You're using the right protective equipment. Like if you're sanding, using proper dust extraction equipment with a vacuum cleaner and a gas, proper rated gas mask.
I'm still here. But
Well, it's the same thing as if you think about the treatment in timbers today. You've got CCA, which is the common treatment which is banned in a lot of overseas countries, but still used in New Zealand. So it's copper, chrome, arsenic. So if you're doing a whole lot of subfloor framing, it needs to be treated to an H5 or H4, H5 level, which is again copper, chrome, arsenic. So if you're cutting that, if you're handling that with bare hands, without masks and stuff like that, then basically you're exposing yourself. So
any particular eras prominent with that?
Oh yeah, no, it's happening now.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. So if you go to Mitre 10 or Bunnings or any supplier and say, I'm going to build a deck and I need some piles, some bearers and some joists, it'll be all treated H4. The piles will be treated to H4. The bearers will be treated to H3.1 or 3.2. Sorry, did I say bearers? Yeah, joists. And you've got to cut those up, and you're creating, obviously that's going into the ground, it's going on your hands. So that's happening now. Whereas there are options like MCA, which is microized copper azole, which is more of a natural product, and you can actually use that in. Here's another one. So if you've got someone's going, I'm going to build a garden bed, and they're going to build a raised garden bed, so off they go down to Mitre 10 and pick up Mitre 10, Bunnings, any trade supplier, and I'll start that again, and just because if you want to use that,
Yeah.
just I won't name. I'll just say trade supplier.
We got a good lawyer, have we?
Yeah. So the issue with the CCA treatment timber, aside from the fact that when people are using it, they are cutting it, breathing it, and it's potentially leaching into their body and leaching to the ground, is that a lot of people, when they think I'm going to grow some veggies, so they'll go down to their local trade merchant and buy some green timber because that's what they've been told to use, and what that is that's all CCA treated timber. So that's copper, chrome, arsenic leaching into the same soil that you're growing your vegetables and eating your vegetables with, on top of all the sprays that you use to kill the pests. So,
and then it obviously applies to housing structure and everything. Yeah.
So I don't know how much data there is. I'm sure there is loads of data or research of people getting potentially issues with the chemicals that they're touching. Even some of the stuff that is not CCA, there's lots of treatment and different boards. If you're not treating it with respect, we shouldn't be. We should be looking for more natural products, of course. But if you're not treating with respect and looking after your body, then you're going to run into problems later on in life, and that's what we don't want to see. So with the windows in these older houses, normally the double hung windows that have got weights in the walls. I've done a lot of retrofitting of those back in the day. They're not great in the fact that, or I'll go back, they are good because they're wooden, and they're good for thermal bridging, or lack of thermal bridging because they're wood, but they're very drafty and they're single glazed. So you can retrofit PVC. I'd suggest PVC windows rather than aluminium, because of the fact that aluminium is such a great thermal conductor in itself. So when you're talking about windows on the older houses, a lot of them will be timber, and if you aren't looking at retrofitting in PVC windows or thermally broken aluminium, you can, or taking the whole windows out and putting new windows in, you can retrofit units into the existing frames if they're all right. And depending if your budget doesn't stretch, what I would definitely look at is, if the window frames are in good conditions and not rotting, is just looking at working on the opening windows and making sure you can rebate some draft seals into them, and then retrofitting them with double glazing, because timber is the best product you can put in your windows, because it's it's not a great thermal bridge, right? So it's one of the, when we're importing windows and we are importing timber, they're the most expensive ones. So that's the best product to retrofit stuff into. Assessing your project in itself rather than watching what other people are doing. That's good to watch other people, you get some good ideas, but say for this house, for example, it was built in the 70s, it would have had timber frame windows. I don't know what quality they were when they changed them to aluminium. If they were still in good shape, I would have left them where they were and retrofitted double glazing units in them and done some work around opening sashes and stuff like that, because timber is the best product you can have in a hole in your wall. Whereas they've replaced them with aluminium windows, bifold doors, which has got a lot of air gaps around them. They don't close properly. They transfer the heat. They're not thermally broken. So one of the back bedrooms in the middle of winter, it's -2 on the inside of that window, on the inside of that room. I've done some thermal imagery of it, and so using aluminium as a window, well, that's another avenue you can go down. But
do people still use aluminium?
Well, people are using aluminium on new houses all the time. It's thermally broken, but it's just not. Yeah, I'm not a fan. aluminium has its place, unfortunately. You've got to look at the whole system, and it's just, if you can recess them in properly and you are using thermal breaks and you do them well, as opposed to just doing it as per building code, then they're probably going to be okay. But still, you've got to recess them into the wall. You've got to do it right if you're using aluminium.
Those little protruding window things that come out.
It's just coming. I think the only thing really you got to look at with the bay windows is weather tightness. There's a lot of areas for potential weather leaks or wind-driven rain, depending on where it is. Sometimes they have their own. Sometimes they have the bay windows are built under the existing roof structure. Sometimes they have their own roof structure with cedar shingles on them. There's a lot for that time. So you just got to have a look at that and assess it. Some of the issues that we used to have, or around those times, is they didn't have what we call long run now. So long run iron is basically exactly what it means. It just run long lengths. So it doesn't mean it's corrugate or the T-rib pro. It's just the meaning that you're running a long length of iron. It could be a different profile. So with the corrugated iron back in the day, they used to do under and over. So they would always be about 6 foot long, the sheets. So on a big long roof, you might have 3 or 4 joints, which is obviously an area for water egress if it's not sealed properly. They used to obviously galvanise their roofing iron, but even so, a lot of the age of those roofs will rust in time, and they do rust because the old lead head nails too. They were great right probably when you installed them, but as the timber dried out, because they would have used wet timber in the roofing structure. So then the timber moves, so does the nail. The nail pops up, the lead pops off the top, and it becomes a whole issue with weather tightness, aside from the fact they didn't have roofing underlay either back in the day. So when you're doing a re-roof, you've got to look at again your budget. If you're ripping the roof off, then obviously that's the main cost. If you can then put build a cavity system into it by using counterbattens, putting a product on top of your rafters in the counterbattens, very much like we do in a new build situation, and then putting the roof on top of that. But then sometimes, it comes down to a cost thing and a budget thing. So making sure that you're using a good quality roofing underlay. It gives you an option by doing the re-roofing, obviously gives you an option to re-insulate from the top as well, which makes it easier, as opposed to trying to crawl around a roof space. So if you, again, with good planning, as you're replacing the roof, you're replacing your insulation or adding to it. But just making sure that the insulation is far enough away from your roofing structure so it doesn't cause condensation. Another option too is if you're planning ahead, if you're putting retrofitting a good balanced ventilation system in, it's good to do it with the roof off, or a ducted heat pump system, or taking out your heater tank in your roof, things like that. There's lots of things you can do, and also you could be running new cables for wiring too. Lots of things to think about when you're pulling your roof off. It gives you an opportunity to really get into some future proofing. Yeah, so there was so most of the time it was, the older places were using a corrugate profile. Then obviously there's concrete tiles, which is probably not so much used as a new build situation, but you obviously still get older houses that still have concrete tiles on them. They're quite, obviously there's a joint every 400 millimeters or whatever, so there's a lot of wind that's going in there. You can't get a lot of wind driven rain through there, and they crack, so you get moisture. So again, if you can stretch your budget to replace it with long run, that's your safest option, just because big long sheets minimises joints. Yeah, well, that's the same thing as, like if you want to keep that look of a tiled roof, there are pressed metal tiles. So, you can, because the way that the roofs are set up, you have a rafter and then you have battens every 400, say, for concrete tiles. So the pressed roof tiles are usually the same, so you can actually replace them, so you don't have to replace all your timbers, which again can help the budget if you're not wanting to go for a long run look, or if you want to retain the look of the metal tiles, the tiled look, sorry. Yeah, a lot of the older houses, you know, usually have your box shaped house, and then someone will add on a lean-to at the back for additional toilet or laundry or whatever. Those areas are always need looking at, because they probably haven't been weather tight, haven't properly weather tight. So you'll always get leaks around those areas. So when you're doing that, you really need to look at how that's constructed and retrofit some flashings if you have to. I think it had some work done down the kitchen end, and it had a lean-to where the laundry was added and a new toilet. So yeah, you'd be very hard pressed to find an original that hasn't been touched. Yeah, because there's always going to be, you know, things like here. I mean, I'm sure this was renovated by builders, or some of the work was done by builders, and you know, it's just, you got to just go, righto, that was done, and I've got to deal with it my way now. And how it was done is how it was presented to me, and how I purchased it. So I knew with open eyes that there was going to be issues. So it's just knowing how to deal with them.
Things. I mean, I've got.
Well, again, it comes down to budget, because you know, though a lot of those I've done lots of work on. This is going back probably 25 years ago. Doing some work on some of those Art Decos with those flat roofs with the parapets at the front, you know, plaster and stuff like that. And the plaster would always crack and they would always leak. So there's a little, you know, you have to basically either replaster the whole lot with new flashings and stuff like that. And the roof, well then, same thing, depends on how much damage there is. So a lot of the times you're looking at removing the whole lot and redoing it.
Retaining the flat roof.
If you want to retain the flat roof, because you'd have to, you don't really want to put new product over, you know, a Band-Aid over a big cut, because any moisture that's in there is going to stay in there. So you need to identify the problem, fix the problem, and then repair the whole thing. It's one of those tricky ones. It's one of those, you only get really one shot with those sort of roofs. You know, a corrugated iron roof, you could replace a sheet here and there if you needed to. You wouldn't want to, but you know, whereas you could have, and water's a funny thing with leaks, is it can come in over here and end up over there. It'll just find the easiest line. Was it the line of least resistance?
Correct or not?
Well, a lot of them aren't. They're not necessarily flat. They do have some sort of slope on them. But what I do is probably increase the slope on it, and you know, relook at where the hidden gutters are and stuff like that. Because a lot of them will have pretty flat, and then it'll go to a rain head, and then it'll go to the outside. So you just got to make sure that it's all sloping at a good rate to get the water off the roof, rather than sitting there. Because a lot of times, if they build it flat, then the timber that they've used to frame it, they've put it too big a span, so it'll create hollows in the roof structure itself, and then that's where water sits. And if the water's sitting on a joint, and the joint's constantly underwater, especially in winter, then it's going to fail. So with all of those different types of claddings, and it comes down to that first asbestos test. If you're worried about what the product is, if you don't know, don't risk it. Get it tested. So some of the old claddings and even sophites were asbestos sheets. So that, you know, to get those out, you break them out, as long as you're not grinding them and stuff like that. But you need to get rid of it properly and get it taken out by the appropriate person. So there are obviously, you're going to need to find a replacement of it. That's because if you're not recladding the whole house, and you've got to find bits. So, you know, going to second-hand dealers and stuff, they usually have similar products, but again, it's making sure that what you're doing with it is fit for purpose. Probably not like a whole lot. I guess it just comes down to how weather tight it is. Because if you want to keep that look, then chances are those older ones, they don't have a great deal of insulation in them. So, you know, if you want to keep that look, then maybe look at dropping it down and insulating it more, and then putting some dummy rafters on. If that makes sense.
And the sort of earthquake risks of chimney structures are just the same as any sort of.
Well, I think, you know, a lot of the chimneys that were around have been taken down to at least below roofline now. If there's any chimneys that are still in in play, like say we're talking about Summerfield Street, that would have been taken down. A lot of those chimneys would have been taken down to the ceiling line, and then the bricks are still left in. But some of them have been taken right out. I've done a lot of those myself, where you just take them right down to the. There's normally with a timber floor in older houses that have a concrete pad where the fire would sit on. So a timber floor around the whole house, but then in the middle, when you've got two rooms, usually back to back, they have two double fires sharing the same chimney, and there's a big concrete slab. So normally you take the chimney right down to that.
Is that just in Christchurch or else?
Oh no, it would be of those eras, like especially in the 1900s and 1920s. They always used to have double fires back to back, so a fire in each room. A house we used to live in when I was about 10 to 13 years old. It was a big house, and it was quite old back then. A big two-storied two-storied weatherboard house, and it had every room had a fire. Yeah, and they were all back to backs, and there were just chimneys up everywhere. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, the leaky homes thing was an interesting era, I suppose you could say. Like for me, it come down to not people were blaming bad building or bad design. Well, it was a combination of everything: bad building, bad design, bad product selection. So you can't blame the builder for building something. They should know that it's not going to work, but it comes down to making sure the design's right, the product selection's right, and it's the follow through to the builder, so it's built right. That's it. Maybe it was lack because this was all happening prior to the building code. So then they've come up with some designs to say, right, we can push these windows out to the outer edges of the building, so any moisture that gets in there tracks down, which is fine, but they're not thinking about the bigger picture about energy efficiency and performance and stuff like that. Europeans have been recessing windows because that's where it stems from, is parapets and windows and all that sort of stuff. Where water has, water's not going to get in on a flat monolithic surface. Of course, if the cladding system itself is not appropriate for the situation, then you're going to have issues before it even starts anyway. So it's just making sure that the products are used that are appropriate for the situation or the climate. Auckland gets a lot more rain than, say, Mackenzie country. So a lot more wind-driven rain too. So you've got to make sure that the design's right, fit for purpose, the products are fit for purpose, and the person designing and building is also fit for purpose.
That whole kind of thing, like what I was saying about the Deco era and the leaky homes era, the sleek external image created a vulnerability around the windows and roof flashings as well.
Well, it comes down to a lot of those Deco ones you're talking about have flat roofs with a parapet, so you can't see the roof line around the outside. And then that was quite an in thing where people had parapets, and architectural roofs were all coming with hidden gutters, and hidden gutters are just an area for disaster. It's just you just need to get the water away from the house or away from the inside of the house. You know what I mean? So it just comes down to design. If you're designing hidden gutters, it's just making sure that the product that you're using goes far enough back. It's got protection from, say, leaves falling in, which is not going to block the downpipes. All that sort of stuff comes into it. And it's the same thing with flat roofs and hailstorms. If you don't have hail guards or like platforms that catch leaves, like even just gutter guard and whatnot. That's the stuff that you've got to think of. Like even, when you're in a house like this, you could potentially you won't get leaks from the inside because the gutter's away from the house, but with hidden gutters, the gutters are over the top of the house. They're not away from the house. So that's, a design thing, a design flaw with a lot of those things.
So if you're buying a place with hidden gutters, would you get rid of the hidden gutters?
Well, it depends on the design of the house. How much is the workers involved with the hidden gutter. A job we were doing down in Queenstown had it was a 1950s house, and it's been done up. It got done up in the 70s, I think. It didn't have any insulation on it, and it had a hidden gutter running right through the living room. So basically, we didn't change the roof structure at the time, but now it has been. So now that hidden gutter is non-existent. It's not being used. So the water gets taken away. So that's, it comes down to budget and what you're going to do with the job in the end of it. That's the thing. It's just coming down to knowing about it. And a lot of people just don't know. Oh, why is my roof leaking? Because you haven't cleared the leaves, or there's, that job we did in Armagh Street, for example, that has a lot of hidden gutters. Like all the roof, it's flat, so the gutter comes down here. But we've got a platform that stops. Like if there's a hailstorm, they won't get leaves built up in there. But if there's a big hailstorm, and it stops the hail from getting into the gutters. So it's been thought of.
Practical solutions.
Well, it's just about
There's
just
a
thinking about it.
practical solution, for everything.
You just got to think about, what's your end goal? What's going to be the product? I call it the ADHD tax. If you don't do something, it's called an ADHD tax. It's going to cost you in the end, right? Yeah. So when you're buying a house and doing your due diligence, making sure you're getting a thorough check, for moisture and for visual, getting a builder that knows about older houses too and has done renovations is probably a key thing, is making sure you've got the right person to look at the property that you're buying. So otherwise, if you just go in there and buy it out of emotion without proper thought, then you're going to run into problems and spend a lot of money. And that's where people get a lot of caught out, is they fall in love with the place, they buy it with emotion without proper thought. Yeah,
Perfect.
that's the thing, is people go in and go, I've seen it before, they just fall in love with the place. But I'm like, I look at it and go, no, stop it. I can see you're not thinking about the issues that are from a lifestyle block point of view, or a small house an older house that's been transported. I'm just thinking about someone that wanted me to look at a property, and I said, well, how old's the septic tank? How old's the house? Has it been insulated? Or it might have been done up, but has it been insulated properly? How much work do you need to get this place? You got a lot of work to do. Yeah, anyway.
Did they go ahead and buy
No.
it?
I didn't. I think Art Deco has the way that they've been designed and built pose a lot more problems, have potential for a lot more problems. Like an old weatherboard villa, yes, they're cold and drafty, but chances are they're built in a way that won't get wet via rain leaks and stuff like that. And if they do get a bit of moisture, then they will dry out because they're so drafty. Do you know what I mean? Some of them people think they've got good bones, but half of them have probably just been eaten away with borer and got some dry rot. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, everything's got good bones until you pull the linings off the wall. It's like Mike Tyson. Everyone's got a good plan until they get punched in the face.
I love that. I think we should probably use that. It's perfect.
Yeah.